How the crash will affect.
Jó estét kívánok! Én az önök GPS-e vagyok a továbbiakban. Szívesen állok rendelkezésre, amelyben Japánban bennünket valakinek meg kell állni. Végül minden nőt unul valaki, ahogy szokták ott mondani, és ezügyben rendelkezésükre állok bármiben. Kevésbé vagyok jó, de abban is segítek némelykor, hogyha útvonalat szeretnének választani, de abban azért ritkában fordulnak hozzám, ha szabad kérnem. Egyet nem bírok, nem, bocsánat, kettőt nem bírok összesen. A kompon hányok, ha lehetséges, akkor arra nem menjünk, vagy arra válaszolok egy másik hangot, illetve azt gyűlölöm, de attól kifejezetten rémült vagyok, hogyha elmegy a GPS vétel. Kérem, biztosítsa folyamatosan a GPS vételt. Egyebekben pedig jó vezetést kívánok, és jó hangulatot, és
usually sickens children during cold weather months, has surprised doctors and put many babies in the hospital in the United States. The virus is called RSV, or respiratory syncytial virus. It is a common sickness that is like the common cold, but the virus can also cause severe sickness in babies and old people. Cases of RSV dropped sharply last year when people mostly stayed at home and avoided busy areas during the COVID-19 health crisis. But RSV cases began increasing as pandemic restrictions eased. I've never seen anything like this before, said Dr. Kate Dudkevich. She is medical director at Beacon Children's Hospital in South Bend, Indiana. I've never seen cases in July or close to July, she added. She recently treated 2 babies who were infected with RSV. Both needed oxygen treatment to help them. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a health advisory on June 10th. It warned of an increase in RSV cases across parts of the southern United States. Cases have appeared in other areas too. LaRonda St. John became worried when her 6-week-old son, Beau, developed a bad cough. She suspected RSV when she saw that he seemed to be struggling to breathe easily. The doctor's office couldn't get me in because they were flooded with people calling about children with similar symptoms, St. John said. A medical test at the hospital confirmed Beau had RSV. The baby developed an above-normal heart rate and had to be hospitalized overnight. His 16-month-old sister, Lulabelle, also got the virus, but was not as sick and did not need to go to the hospital. St. John said at first she thought her children might have COVID-19 because it is the wrong season for RSV. I can't say I was relieved because I know RSV is just as bad, she said. In the United States, RSV leads to 2 million doctor visits each year, 58,000 hospitalizations, and up to 500 deaths in children under the age of 5. That is higher than the estimated number of children affected by COVID-19. Among adults aged 65 and older, RSV causes 180,000 hospitalizations and 14,000 deaths yearly. Cases in children and adults usually develop in the autumn through early spring. Off-season cases of RSV reported in Australia were a sign that the same might happen in the United States, said Dr. Larry Koscielek. He is an infectious disease specialist with Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago. Babies are usually exposed to RSV during the first year of life. Often older children in the family become infected at school and bring the virus home, Koscielek said. Because of stay-at-home orders and social distancing during the pandemic, young babies and children were not exposed to the virus as much as usual last fall and winter. That just leaves a much larger proportion of susceptible infants, Koscielek said. In infants, signs of RSV may include increased crying, poor feeding, a high body temperature, and lack of energy. In infants and in babies, Babies who develop this condition, called bronchiolitis, may require hospitalization and oxygen treatment.
Mi van? Átfestjük az autót pirosra? Belül?
Imagine you want to talk about a plan you are making, perhaps for a trip this summer. In today's Everyday Grammar, we will explore some important ideas for discussing plans. You will learn about important verb forms and expressions that can be used to talk about summer vacations, or really any kind of fun event in the future. When we talk about planning, we are generally talking about future time. English speakers show future time by using a couple of different structures. The first is to add the word will. For example, a student might say, I will finish my homework later. The main verb is finish. The word will suggests a future time. In everyday speech, English speakers often shorten will, as in, I'll finish my homework later. When talking about summer plans, a person might say, we will travel in August. Or, we'll travel in August. But English speakers also use the structure be plus going to talk about future plans. An example of this would be, we are going to travel in August. In everyday speech, going to is sometimes shortened to gonna, as in, we're gonna travel in August. But will and be going to are not the only useful structures for talking about plans. Different kinds of expressions can also be helpful. Perhaps one of the most useful of these structures is make plus a noun phrase. A noun phrase is a group of words that act like a noun in a sentence. Consider this example. Have you made summer plans yet?
Yes, we talked, argued, and finally made a decision.
So, what are your plans?
We made arrangements to stay at a hotel on the beach.
You don't sound very happy about it.
I wanted to go visit family.
Én értem, hogy van légzsák,
I'd rather go to the beach.
ennyivel.
Your family must be a lot nicer than mine. Note that the structure make plus a noun phrase appeared several times. Made summer plans, made a decision, made arrangements. In this case, make plus a noun phrase means to plan or decide to do something. English speakers also often use phrasal verbs when talking about plans. A phrasal verb is a verb and another short word or words that act together in a sentence. They take on a meaning different from what the individual words suggest. One common phrasal verb used for planning is pick up. Pick up has different meanings, but probably the most common one is to get or take something or someone from a place. So, someone might plan to pick up a family member from the airport, or a person might plan to pick up some food. Consider this example. Are you going to pick up Ben at the airport?
Yes, he arrives at 8 o'clock.
What will you do for dinner?
We will pick up some food on the way home.
Note that both will and be going to appear in the discussion, as does the phrasal verb pick up. Take take some of the ideas you heard today and use them to write about your own plans. These plans can be real or imagined. What is important is that you get experience describing plans of many kinds. Of course, there are many other ways you can talk about future plans, but we will wait to explore those ideas in a future program. I'm John Russell.
VOA Learning English presents America's Presidents. Today we are talking about Ronald Reagan. He was president for 2 terms and served from 1981 to 1989. Before that, he was the governor of California, worked as an actor, and led a labor union. As president, Reagan is credited for changing the direction of the country. He tried to establish a feeling of confidence in the American people. Although not everyone profited equally from his policies, the president rarely suffered in public opinion polls. Reagan was called the Great Communicator because he was able to connect with many Americans and to speak persuasively about conservative values. He is remembered warmly by many Republican Party politicians and voters especially. Ronald Reagan is often linked to California and the American West, but he was born and raised in Illinois, in the center of the United States. His father sold shoes, and his mother mostly took care of Ronald and his older brother, Neil. The entire family supported the Democratic Party, especially President Franklin Roosevelt. While the boys were growing up, the Reagans did not have much money, and the father suffered from alcoholism. But Ronald was energetic and took part in many activities. He played football and basketball, ran on the track team, swam, acted in plays, led student groups, wrote for school newspapers and yearbooks, and worked several jobs to help pay for his education and support his parents. He attended Eureka College in Illinois and completed his studies in 1932. One of his first jobs out of college was as a sports announcer for a radio station. He had an appealing voice and a natural way of talking that was a good fit for radio. Reagan was also good-looking and a dependable worker. In time, he was offered a chance to act in movies and moved to California. During his acting career, Reagan made more than 50 films. He also married actress Jane Wyman and had 2 children with her. But after several years, the relationship ended. Their marriage ended in divorce. 4 years later, Reagan married another actress. Her name was Anne Robbins, but she was called Nancy Davis. They also had 2 children. As he was starting his second family, Reagan began another part of his career. He served as host of a popular television series about the American West. He also became president of a labor union, the Screen Actors Guild. It represented actors, announcers, and others working in the film and television industry. During that time, Reagan's political beliefs changed. He increasingly supported conservative ideas. During public appearances, he often spoke in support of business interests. He also expressed concern that the federal government was limiting Americans' freedom. The message was well received by many Americans. Although the Democratic Party was in power for most of the 1960s, a number of Americans were becoming increasingly conservative. Reagan won national recognition in 1966 when he successfully ran for governor of California as a Republican. In 1970, voters re-elected him to the position. But Reagan had set his sights on the presidency. He sought the Republican nomination in both 1968 and 1976. Finally, in 1980, he won the office. By that time, he had already had several careers, as well as a long life. At age 69, he was the oldest person until then to be elected president. He made improving the U.S. economy his highest concern. One way to do that, he believed, was to reduce the influence of the federal government. He wanted especially to cut some of the government programs that former President Lyndon Johnson had put in place to help poor people. Reagan believed that cutting taxes, especially on big businesses, would help strengthen the economy and in time help everyone. In a speech after taking office, Reagan noted that government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem. At first, the economy continued to struggle, but in a few years, Reagan's policies appeared to work. Unemployment dropped, the stock market rose, and many industries grew quickly. Americans often remember Reagan's presidency as a time of economic growth. Not everyone benefited equally, however. Reagan's critics observed that his policies largely helped people who were already wealthy. The divide between rich and middle-class Americans increased during Reagan's presidency. And Reagan did not reduce government spending in all areas. In fact, he sharply increased military spending. One result was a large national debt. Another result, Reagan supporters say, was a quicker end to the Cold War. One of Reagan's major foreign policy goals was to end the standoff with the Soviet Union. He believed that building up the U.S. military was the best way to pressure the Soviets to reach an agreement on arms control. Reagan also spoke out strongly against communism. In his second term, he famously appealed to the new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, to tear down the Berlin Wall. For some, the wall was a sign of communism. Many historians say Reagan's policies worked. For sure, Reagan and Gorbachev improved relations between their countries. And in time, the Soviet leadership permitted the Berlin Wall to come down.
Én értem, hogy van légzsák, de ennyivel?
In addition to the economy and the Cold War, Reagan is often remembered for his likable personality. He spoke easily with the public, often had a positive message about the country, and usually appeared cheerful. He won even more public approval after a man with mental problems tried to kill him. The bullets seriously injured several people nearby and just missed Reagan's heart. Yet, Shortly after he was shot, the president joked with his wife and with his doctors.
Én meg ugye álmomban szeretnék meghalni, mint a nagyapám, és nem
president was more popular than ever. Reagan's political image also survived a scandal known as Iran-Contra. In brief, Congress found that a number of government officials secretly sold U.S. weapons to Iran as part of a deal to free hostages. Then, the officials used some of the money to help rebels in Nicaragua. The actions violated congressional rules. They also challenged Reagan's promise that he had not traded weapons for hostages. The president apologized for any part he had played in the events. Polls showed that, in general, the American public accepted his apology and continued to trust him. Unlike most U.S. presidents who lose public support during their terms, Reagan finished his time in office as he had taken it, with the support of more than half of Americans. Reagan retired to his home in California with his wife, Nancy. For several years, he wrote about his life and helped organize his presidential library. But in a few years, the former president announced that he suffered from Alzheimer's. The disease affects people's ability to think, remember, and express themselves. Soon, Reagan disappeared from public life. He died in 2004. But he is well remembered as an able politician who could work effectively with many people. He is also remembered by both supporters and critics for being a powerful voice for conservative ideas and traditional values. His influence extended beyond his 2 terms. Later generations of leaders and voters called themselves Reagan Republicans.
Csak úgy rávezetni az embert, és az aztán boldog attól, hogy ott van. Nem boldog vagy, hát nem.
I'm Kelly Jean Kelly.
And that's our program for today. Listen again tomorrow to learn English through stories from around the world. I'm Jonathan Evans.
And I'm Ashley Thompson.
And this is VOA1 The Hits.
Jó estét kívánok! Én az önök GPS-e vagyok a továbbiakban. Szívesen állok rendelkezésre, amennyiben japán partnerüket valakinek megkell. Végül minden nőt unó valaki, ahogy szokták volt mondani, és ezügyben rendelkezésükre állok bármiben. Kevésbé vagyok jó, de abban is segítek némelykor, hogyha útvonalat szeretnének választani, de abban azért ritkában fordulnak hozzám, ha szabad kérdezni. Egyet nem bírok, nem, bocsánat, 2 nem bírok összesen. A komfort hányok, ha lehetséges, akkor arra nem menjünk, vagy arra válaszolunk egy másik hangot, illetve azt gyűlölöm, de attól kifejezetten rémült vagyok, hogyha elmegy a GPS-vétel. Kérem, biztosítsa folyamatosan a GPS-vételt. Egyebekben pedig jó vezetést kívánok, és jó hangulatot, és jó!
Alice Bryant answers a question on this week's Ask a Teacher. We close our show with an American story. This week it is The Blue Hotel, Part 1 by Stephen Crane. But first, here are Katie and Jill.
Pop music star Britney Spears won court permission Wednesday to employ a lawyer of her choosing to represent her interests. The decision came in a court hearing in Los Angeles, California. Spears is under the care of a legal guardian agreement known in the state of California as a conservatorship. In some states, it's called a guardianship. A court can appoint conservators for people judged to be too unwell to care for themselves. The health problems can be mental or physical. Conservators have wide power to make financial and other decisions for the person they care for. Britney Spears was placed in a conservatorship in 2008 with her father, Jamie Spears, as head.
Jaj! Annyira jó! Szeretem ezt a játékot! Megjöttünk a célhoz! Képzeld el! Képzeld el!
But recently, Spears began seeking changes to the conservatorship, including the removal of her father as its leader.
On Wednesday, Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Brenda Penny ruled that Spears could hire former federal prosecutor Matthew Rosengart. After the decision, Rosengart called on Spears' father to immediately resign as her conservator. The question remains, why is he She told the judge she had had several talks with his father and wanted his representation. She then spoke in the court. My dad needs to be removed today, she said. Spears added that she would like to see him legally charged with the abuse of his position. She cried as she spoke about the conservatorship, which she described as poor. Spears spoke so fast that at times it was difficult for the court reporter to record her statement.
Spears said she wanted the conservatorship to end immediately, but not if it would force her to undergo more medical evaluations. She described the tests as stupid. She added that she did not want to provide the chance for, in her words, people to question my intelligence for the millionth time. Spears said the conservatorship would deny her requests for things as basic as coffee, her driver's document, and hair care products. She said, I thought they were trying to kill me in the early years of the conservatorship as she was being overworked and examined all the time. She began to cry as she talked about taking comfort in a therapy dog when she felt her family had left her.
Vivian Thurene is the lawyer for Jamie Spears. Thurene told the court that Jamie Spears would not resign from his position as conservator. She said Jamie Spears had always put his daughter's best interests first. Thurene said Britney Spears had many incorrect beliefs. One of those beliefs was that her father is responsible for all the bad things that have happened to her. Thurene also said that for almost 2 years, Spears has had control only over his daughter's money. The lawyer said Jamie Spears surrendered control over the singer's life choices to a court-appointed professional, Jody Montgomery. Thurene argued that an evidentiary hearing was necessary to investigate the claims that Britney Spears made at another hearing held in June. Spears told the court she was being forced to take medications and use an invasive birth control device. Thurene said she found it strange that Britney Spears would make such claims and yet approve of Montgomery as a guardian.
Montgomery's lawyer, Lorianne Wright, also spoke to the court. She said Britney Spears should not have to face additional court examination connected to her recent emotional testimony. I don't think it's a secret that we're dealing with someone with mental illness, Wright said.
Jobbra, vicceltem egyenesen.
Wright also said Britney Spears' medical team had strongly advised that her father needs to be off the conservatorship.
Mi van? Átfestjük az autót pirosra? Belül?
Free Britney waited outside the courthouse during the hearing. They cheered when told of the judge's decision. I'm Katie Weaver.
And I'm Jill Robbins.
Government says it will pay up to $10 million for information on criminal activity over computer networks against important U.S. infrastructure. Cyber criminals often take advantage of openings in security to take control of computer systems. They then ask for large amounts of money, often millions of dollars, to give back control of the system to the owner. This is known as a ransom. The U.S. government believes these criminals do their work without fear of arrest in Russia and several other countries. People can now send information known as a tip about criminals to the U.S. government. They can send tips without giving their name through a form on the part of the internet known as the dark web. Sometimes the U.S. government is the target of a cyber attack. Other times, private companies that are important to the U.S. economy are victims as well. For example, an attack earlier this year against KOLINK disrupted work and travel for about a week in the eastern part of the U.S. The criminal used software known as ransomware to take control of the pipeline's computer systems. It only released its control after getting a payment of over $4 million. Most of the money was later recovered by the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation. R-Evil, another criminal group based in Russia, launched a ransomware attack on July 2nd against more than 1,000 organizations and businesses around the world. After the group's disappearance, an administration official would not say if the U.S. made the group go away. And a Russian official said he did not know about the group. Some cybercrime experts, however, think R-Evil may have disappeared to avoid U.S. officials.
Mi van? Átfestjük az autót pirosra? Belül?
This week on Ask a Teacher, we answer a question from Gelmesa from Ethiopia. Dear VOA, I have a question for you. At school, I usually get asked the difference between the phrases take note and make note. Would you tell me? Hello, Gelmesa. The phrases take note and make note are sometimes interchangeable. But there are small differences between the two phrases. When used as an idiom or expression, the phrase take note means to notice something. If you take note of something, you pay special attention to it Because you think
Nekem
it is
tényleg mindegy, hogy
important
mennyivel
or
mérjük,
has value.
mert én végül is egy viszonylag strapabírótóval vagyok. De biztos vagy benne, hogy te is?
Listen to some examples.
Szép sebesség, gratulálok. Én meg ugye álmomban szeretnék meghalni, mint a nagyapám, és nem üvöltesi
We saw a warning on the news for storms in the area.
Did you take note of how they made the metal handicrafts?
But if you add an
Tudod, mit csinál az emberrel egy
take note,
ütközés egy ilyen
the meaning
sebesség?
changes. Take notes means to write something down for the purpose of remembering it. People often take notes in classes and meetings and at talks or other events when they want to recall information later. Listen to how this speaker uses the phrase.
I watched an excellent program about the symbiosis of sea creatures. I even took some notes.
Én értem, hogy van légzsák, de ennyivel.
Next phrase. The usual wording in American English is make a note of, which means to write or record something quickly as a reminder. So, make a note of has a similar meaning to take notes. You might also hear the phrase make a mental note. It means to make a special effort to remember something in your mind. For example, a person might say,
I will make a mental note to pick up the materials on my way home.
Nekem tényleg mindegy, hogy mennyivel mérjük. Mert én végül is egy viszonylag strapabírótóval vagyok. De biztos vagy benne, hogy te is?
The Blue Hotel, Part 1.
The Palace Hotel at Fort Romper was painted a light blue, a color of blue found on the legs of a certain bird that makes it bright in any surroundings. The Palace Hotel then looked always loud and screaming in a way that made the bright winter scenes of Nebraska seem only a dull gray. It stood alone, and when the snow was falling, the town 200 yards away could not be seen. When a traveler came from the railroad station, he was obliged to pass the Palace Hotel before he came
Én nem vagyok benne biztos, hogy ilyen rohadt gyorsan kéne menni.
Which was Fort Romper. It was believed that no traveler could pass the Palace Hotel without looking at it. Pat Scully, the hotel owner, had proved himself a master at choosing paints.
Tudod, mit csinál az emberrel egy ütközés egy ilyen sebességnek?
When the long lines of trains swept through Fort Romper, passengers were surprised at the sight. Those that knew the brown reds and the dark greens of the eastern part of the country laughed and expressed shame, pity, shock. But to the citizens of this western town and to the people who stopped
Én
there,
értem, hogy van légzsák, de ennyiben.
A wonder. As if the displayed delights of such a blue hotel were not sufficiently inviting, Scully went every morning and evening to meet the trains that stopped at Romper. He would express greetings and welcome to anyone he might see hesitating. One morning, when a snow-covered engine dragged its long string of cars to the station, Scully performed the marvelous trick of catching 3 men. One was a shaky and quick-eyed Swede with a great, shining cheap bag. One was a tall, sun-browned cowboy who was on his way to a job near the Dakota border. One was a little silent man from the East Coast who didn't look like it and didn't announce it. Scully practically made them prisoners. He was so quick and merry and kindly that each probably thought it would be cruel to try to escape. So they followed the eager little man. He wore a heavy fur cap pulled tightly down on his head. It caused his two red ears to stand out stiffly, as if they were made of tin. At last, Scully grandly conducted them through the door of the Blue Hotel. The room which they entered was small. It was occupied mostly by a
Tudod, mit
huge
csinál az emberrel egy ütközés egy ilyen
which
sebességgel?
was burning with great force. At various points on its surface, the iron had become shiny and glowed yellow from the heat. Beside the stove, Scully's son, Johnny, was playing a game of cards with a farmer. They were quarreling.
Én nem vagyok benne biztos, hogy ilyen rohadt gyorsan kéne
With
menni.
loud words, Scully stopped their play and hurried his son upstairs with the bags of the new guests.
Nekem tényleg mindegy, hogy mennyivel mégy. Mert én végül is egy viszonylag strapabírótóban vagyok. De biztos vagy benne, hogy te is.
Washed themselves in this water until they were as red as fire.
Hungaroring!
The Swede, however, merely placed his fingers in the bowl. It was noticeable throughout these proceedings that the three travelers were made to feel that Scully was very kind indeed. He was giving out great favors. Afterward, they returned to the first room. There, sitting about the stove, they listened to Scully shouting at his daughters, who were preparing the noon meal. They employed the silence of experienced men who move carefully among new people. The Swede was especially silent. He seemed to be occupied in making secret judgments of each man in the room. One might have thought that he had the sense of foolish fear which accompanies guilt. He looked like a badly frightened man. Later, at dinner, he spoke a little, directing his conversation entirely to Scully. He said that he had come from New York, where he had worked for 10 years as a suit maker. These facts seemed to interest Scully, and afterward he told that he had lived at Romper for 14 years. The Swede asked about the crops and the price of labor. He seemed hardly to listen to Scully's lengthy replies.
Szép sebesség, gratulálok. Én meg ugye álmomban szeretnék meghalni, mint a nagyapám, és nem üvöltve sikoltozva, mint az utasaik.
Finally, with a laugh, he said that some of these western towns
Én értem, hogy van légzsák, de ennyivel.
After this declaration, he straightened his legs under the table, nodded his head, and laughed again, loud. It was plain that this had no meaning to the others. They looked at him, wondering, and in silence.
Én nem vagyok benne biztos, hogy ilyen rohadt gyorsan kéne menni.
Play a game of cards. The cowboy offered to play with Johnny, and they all turned to ask the Swede to play with the little Easterner. The Swede asked some questions about the game. Learning that it bore many names and that he had played it under another name, he accepted the invitation. He came toward the men nervously, as though he expected to be attacked. Finally seated, He looked from face to face and laughed sharply. This laugh was so strange that the Easterner looked up quickly. The cowboy sat with his mouth open, and Johnny paused, holding the cards with still fingers. Afterward, there was a short silence. Then Johnny said,
"Well, let's begin. Come on now."
They pulled their chairs forward until their knees touched under the table. They began to play, and their interest in the game caused the others to forget the strange ways of the Swede. Suddenly, the Swede spoke to Johnny.
"I suppose there have been a good many men killed in this room."
The mouths of the others dropped open, and they looked at him.
"What are you talking about?"
said Johnny. The Swede laughed again, his loud laugh, full of a kind of false courage.
"Oh, you know what I mean, all right,"
he answered.
"I don't,"
Johnny protested. The card game stopped, and the men stared at the Swede. Johnny evidently felt that as the son of the hotel owner, he should make a direct inquiry.
"Now, what are you trying to say?"
he asked. The Swede's fingers shook on the edge of the table.
"Oh, maybe you think I haven't been anywhere. Maybe you think I don't have any experience?"
"I don't know anything about you,"
answered Johnny.
"I don't care where you've been. I just don't know what to say. Nobody has ever been killed in this room."
The cowboy, who had been steadily gazing at the Swede, then spoke.
"What's wrong with you, fella?"
Apparently, it seemed to the Swede that he was powerfully threatened. He trembled and turned pale near the corners of his mouth. He sent an appealing glance in the direction of the little Easterner.
"They say they don't know what I mean,"
he remarked bitterly to the Easterner. The latter answered after long and careful thought.
"I don't understand you,"
he said calmly. The Swede made a movement then, which announced that he thought he had met attack from the only place where he had expected sympathy, if not help.
"I see that you are all against me. I see."
The cowboy felt as though he had lost his senses.
"Say,"
he cried as he threw the cards fiercely down upon the table.
"Say, what are you trying to do?"
The Swede jumped up.
"I don't want to fight,"
he shouted.
"I don't want to fight."
The cowboy stretched his long legs slowly and carefully. His hands were in his pockets.
"Well, who thought you did?"
he inquired. The Swede moved rapidly back toward a corner of the room.
Nekem tényleg mindegy, hogy
His hands were out protectively
végül
in
is
front
egy
of
viszonylag
his chest.
stabilótokban vagyok.
But he was
De biztos vagy
making an
benne, hogy
apparent
te is?
struggle to control his fright.
"Gentlemen,"
he almost whispered.
"I suppose
Én nem vagyok benne biztos, hogy ilyen rohadt gyorsan kéne menni.
I can leave this house."
A door opened and Scully himself entered. He paused in surprise as he noted the terror-filled eyes of the Swede.
Én értem, hogy van légzsák, de ennyivel?
The Swede answered him quickly and eagerly.
"These men are going to kill me."
"Kill you?"
shouted Scully.
"Kill you? What are you talking about?"
The Swede put out his hands helplessly.
Menjél tovább egyenesen, jó?
Scully turned upon his son.
"What is this, Johnny?"
The lad had become ill-tempered.
"I don't know,"
he answered.
"It doesn't make any sense to me."
He began to pick up the cards, gathering them together angrily.
"He says a good many men have been killed in this room." something like that. And he says he's going to be killed here too. I don't know what's wrong with him. He's probably crazy.
Scully then looked for explanation to the cowboy, but the cowboy simply shook his head.
Kill you?
Said Scully again to the Swede.
Kill you? Man, you're crazy.
Az a mutatvány, hogy egyenesen kéne tovább menni az ügyelőre.
Burst out the Swede.
I know what will happen. Yes, I'm crazy. Yes, of course, I'm crazy. Yes, but I know one thing.
There was suffering and terror upon his face.
I know I won't get out of here alive.
Scully turned suddenly and faced his son.
You've been troubling this man.
Johnny's voice was loud with its burden of undeserved blame.
Why, good God, I haven't done anything to him.
The Swede broke in.
Gentlemen, do not trouble yourselves. I will leave this house. I will go away because...
He blamed them with his glance.
Because I do not want
Évsebesség, gratulálok. Én meg ugye álmomban szeretnék meghalni, mint a nagyapám, és nem üvöltve sikoltozva.
Until I hear the reason of this business. If anybody has troubled you,
átfestjük az autót pirosra? Belül?
This is my house. You are under my roof. And I will not allow any peaceful man to be troubled.
He looked threateningly at Johnny, the cowboy.
Tudod, mit csinál az emberrel egy ütközés egy ilyen sebesség?
Mr. Scully, don't. I will go away. I want to be killed.
The Swede moved towards the door, which opened to the stairs. It was evidently his intention to go at once for his bag.
No!
Shouted Scully commandingly, but the pale-faced man slipped by him and disappeared.
Now?
Scully angrily to the others.
What does this mean?
Johnny and the cowboy cried together.
Why, we didn't do anything to him.
Scully's eyes were cold.
No.
He said.
You didn't?
Johnny repeated his words.
Tudod, mit csinál az emberrel egy ütközés egy ilyen sebesség?
Madman I ever saw. We didn't do anything at all. We were just sitting here playing cards, and he...
The father suddenly spoke to the Easterner.
What have these boys been doing?
Szép sebesség, gratulálok. Én meg ugye álmomban szeretnék meghalni, mint a nagyapám, és nem üvöltve sikoltozva, mint az utasai.
He said at last, slowly. Scully began to shout.
But what does it mean?
He stared fiercely at his son.
I ought to beat you for this, my boy.
Johnny was wild.
Well, what have I done?
He screamed at his father.
Én nem vagyok benne biztos, hogy ilyen rohadt gyorsan kéne menni.
And that's our program for today. Listen again tomorrow to learn English through stories from around the world. I'm Jonathan Evans.
And I'm Ashley Thompson. Here are the stories we have for you on today's program. First, the Education Report. Dan Friedel talks about students in the United States training for jobs. Then, Jonathan Evans brings us a story about the Olympics. I will return with this week's Words and Their Stories. Today we talk about an expression that comes from music. We finish our 30 minutes together with our series on America's presidents, written and hosted by Kelly Jean Kelly. Today she tells us about George Herbert Walker Bush. But first, the education report.
Monica Bentley is the administrator for Edison Academy in the American state of Virginia. The Academy helps students learn about things like computer security, car repair, hair and beauty care, and supervising a professional kitchen. Bentley has many years of experience helping students learn about careers. But she recently had trouble persuading one student, her daughter, to try out a job training class at the academy. She didn't want to travel, Bentley said of her daughter, whose main school is about 30 minutes away from the career training center. I wasn't going to make her do it, but I think it would have been a great opportunity. Sometimes a school system has just one training center for every 5 or 6 high schools. And asking high school students to travel from their local school to another building is just one of several obstacles career training centers face. They need to persuade students to take more than 1 or 2 classes. They also need to expand programs that prepare students for basic training, for higher level training at high school. Another problem is when students are interested in taking career training classes, but their parents do not agree. They might believe the student should take more classes in subjects like math and science. Bentley said, sometimes parents' wishes prevent training centers like the Edison Academy from getting the community support they need. However, once parents see the kind of education their child can receive from a career training center, they usually change their minds. Charles Wilkinson recently graduated from Edison High School and took some auto repair classes at the academy. He described the conflict between the high school and the academy. He felt as if the adults in the high school did not support students who wanted to take career classes. The attitude that students doing well shouldn't waste their time in CTE classes is heavily damaging to the experience and needs to see a change, he said. Alicia Hyslop is the Senior Director of Public Policy for the Association for Career and Technical Education. Hyslop said, training centers like the Edison Academy are good for students who do not want to attend college. But the people in charge of the centers also need to tell people that many students who take classes there move on to attend college. She said, high schools around the U.S. need to work hard to align secondary programs with post-secondary programs